Hey guys, this is Alex from Bevelers Creations. I partner with ToolsToday to bring you this modern entryway bench. It has lots of angles that will sure to catch anyone's attention as they walk in through the door, so stick around and I'll show you how I built it. Like any project, I began by laying out all the pieces I'll need before cutting them down to the rough length on my table saw using my Amana Prestige 40-tooth general purpose blade. After which, I resawed the 8/4 walnut pieces to yield material for both the cabinet as well as the drawer boxes. And then finally milling them down to their final thickness and prep the edges for glue up. I used the domino here to help me with the glue up, but it's certainly not a requirement, but since I had it, I just decided to use it. What I do think is important though is to have a few sets of cauls on hand to help keep the panels nice and flat as the glue cures. The next day, I began to cut the panels to their final length. The top and bottom panels will receive a vertical cut on one end and a 45-degree miter on the other, while the left side panel will receive miter cuts on both ends. For this particular cabinet, where the top and bottom panels will have different width, I found that it's easiest to cut the taper on the side panel first and then use that to finalize the cuts for the top and bottom panels. Finally, both the top and bottom panels will receive a bevel that has an angle matching the taper on the side panel to ensure that the edges will match up after assembly. Next, it's time to cut the stop dados for the vertical partitions. After laying out for the position and width of the dados, I loaded my router with the Amana Tools Spektra coated 1/2-inch spiral bit. I made one pass along one of my layout lines, readjusted the router to finalize the width of the dado with a second pass. And finally repeating this process for the second dado. While the 1/2-inch bit is still in my router, I used an edge guide to cut a 1/4-inch rabbet along the back edge of my workpieces for accepting a back panel later. Finally, I swapped out the 1/2-inch bit with the Amana Tool Carbide tipped 45-degree chamfer bit to add a bevel along the cabinet outer panels before finally gluing the case together with some dominoes for reinforcement. To help with the glue up, I used a piece of plywood to prop up one end of the top panel while I joined the other end to the side panel. This piece of ply will help to keep the top panel level so that I could determine the final height of the vertical partitions. To allow the partitions to hide the rounded ends of the stop dados cut earlier, I cut 2 notches at the ends of the front edge of each panel. Then, using the Amana 1/2-inch Spektra coated spiral bit at the router table, I cut a stop dado into each vertical partition for holding a horizontal shelf. After all the joinery is cut, it was finally time to glue everything up, including a 1/4-inch walnut ply for the back panel, which is attached using glue and some brad nails. With the case structure complete, the next day I moved on to making the drawer boxes, which have sides that are 5/8 thick with dados cut into them to accept the 1/4-inch bottom panel later. And the side panels of the drawer boxes will all receive rabbets, which is how they attach to the front and back panels, using glue and some brad nails, as you see here. And finally, these drawer boxes are attached to the cabinet using some bottom mount drawer slides. Next, I began to work on the base. I set the angle of the miter gauge at 15 degrees to make the cuts for the legs, since that's the angle I want the legs to stand at. And I followed up by making a taper cut going from 1 inch at the bottom of the leg to 3 inches at the top using my crosscut sled, repeating this process to yield 4 legs. And without changing the angle on my crosscut sled, I made the cuts on the ends of the 2 stretchers to match the angle of the legs. Next, I laid out the crosslap joint used to join the 2 stretchers together. To make the cut at the table saw, I used the Amana superfine 8-inch dado stack, which also has an Electro-Blu coating to minimize burning while also helping to extend the life of the blade. I made 2 passes to clear out the bulk of the material and then any additional smaller passes to get the perfect fit. And then I clamped the legs and the stretchers together to mark my cuts for the bridle joints that will bring everything together. Back at the table saw, I first cut the mortise on the legs with a tenoning jig, followed by cutting the tenons on the stretchers last, because it's much easier to fit the tenon to the mortise than the other way around. You can see here that the stretchers and the legs both sit proud of each other. This was actually done on purpose because it's much quicker to flush everything up after the assembly than trying to sneak up on the fit at the table saw. And finally, I attached the base to the cabinet using some figure 8 clips, which will sit in some depressions that I drilled using a Forstner bit. With all the angles that this bench has, it just felt right that the drawer fronts should have some shape too as well, so I designed the 3D polymetric shape and carved it on my CNC. For the first pass, I used my Amana tool Spektra coated 1/4 inch spiral bit to clear out the bulk of the material. And then I switched to the Amana Spektra coated 16th inch taper ball nose bit for the finishing pass to smooth out all the angled surfaces and reveal those sharp corners. I decided to cut the top and bottom drawer fronts separately to leave me some room for adjustments when cutting them down to size at the table saw. And finally, I completed the drawer fronts by cutting a finger groove along the back using my Amana 1/4 inch radius bowl and tray bit before assembling them to the drawer boxes. After I moved this bench into my house, the angles and the asymmetry of the piece really popped and added a lot of character to the space. I just could not be happier with the way this turned out, and I hope you also enjoy the build and feel inspired by it to build something for yourself. Once again, this is Alex from Betos Creations, and I want to give a big thanks to ToolsToday for sponsoring this video. I'll catch you guys next time.